The wind rolled over the dry grasslands like an old whisper, carrying with it the scent of smoke and pine from the distant hills. The sun was slipping behind the ridges, painting the sky in fading streaks of red and gold. In that dying light, a boy stood at the edge of a quiet clearing, clutching a worn axe in his small hands. His clothes were torn at the knees, his shoes scuffed from long miles of walking. And his face, though young, held a kind of worry that didn't belong to childhood. His breath came out in shaky clouds as he looked toward the cluster of Apache lodges ahead, tired, the smoke from their fires curling into the sky. He hesitated. Every story he'd heard warned against coming this far into Apache land, but hunger had a way of pushing fear aside, and desperation made courage look simple. He took another step forward, his boots crunching softly on the frosted ground. The camp was quiet, except for the low hum of voices near the fires. He swallowed hard and moved closer, his heart thudding like the distant beat of a drum. A shadow shifted by the nearest fire. A tall Apache man turned to look at him. The man's face was lined and calm, his eyes unreadable beneath the flickering firelight. He wore a hide shirt and carried a knife at his belt, though he made no move toward it. The boy's fingers tightened around the axe handle as he found his voice. "I can chop wood in exchange for food. My mom is sick," he said, his voice trembling just enough to betray how frightened he was. The Apache man didn't answer right away. The fire popped and threw sparks into the cold air. Behind him, a few others turned their heads, watching silently. The boy felt every gaze pressing on him, waiting to see if he'd be turned away or worse. His stomach twisted from hunger and fear together. At last, the Apache man spoke in slow English. "You walk far to be here, little one."
"Sir,"
the boy said, keeping his eyes low out of respect. "We came from the valley. There's no food left there. My mother's been sick for days. I just need enough to help her get better. I can work for it." The man studied him, then motioned for him to step closer. The boy obeyed, though his legs felt heavy. The Apache's camp was alive with quiet movement tending pots over the fire. Children peeking curiously from behind woven blankets, and a few men sharpening tools or speaking in their native tongue. The boy had never been this close to them before. He'd only seen Apaches from a distance when his father was still alive. Back when they'd lived on the other side of the river, you chop wood. "You say?" the man said, pointing toward the axe. The boy nodded. "I can do it all night if I have to." The man's eyes softened slightly, though his tone stayed steady. "And your mother waits where?" "In the old barn by the river. We didn't have anywhere else to go." The Apache looked toward another man near the fire, and they exchanged quiet words in their language. The boy couldn't understand, but the sound of it made him nervous. Then the man gestured toward a pile of logs stacked near the edge of the camp. "Show me," he said. The boy hurried over, set his axe, and began to swing. The first few strikes were clumsy, his arms were stiff from the cold, but he pushed through the ache. The sound of the blade biting into the wood echoed through the clearing. He worked fast, desperate to prove his worth. Sweat gathered on his brow despite the chill. The Apache watched in silence, his arms crossed. After a while he spoke again. "You have heart. Not many boys your age would come here alone?" The boy kept chopping, his breath ragged. "I didn't have a choice. My mom, she can't even stand now. I just need something to bring her strength back. I'll do whatever work you ask." The Apache nodded slowly, then turned toward a nearby tent. A few minutes later, he returned with a piece of dried meat wrapped in cloth. "Take this to your mother," he said, offering it to him, "and come back tomorrow. There is more wood than you can cut in one night." The boy froze, staring at the food as if afraid it wasn't real. "You mean it?" The man's gaze was firm. "You earned it. Go before the night gets colder." The boy mumbled his thanks, clutching the food tightly as he turned back toward the dark trees. The wind picked up, sharp and biting, but his heart felt lighter for the first time in days. He walked fast, his boots crunching over frozen leaves until the campfires were only small glows behind him. But as he neared the river, a strange unease began to grow in his chest. The night seemed too quiet. The moon hung low, and every shadow felt alive. He paused, glancing over his shoulder, certain he'd heard footsteps behind him. There was nothing there, only the sound of rushing water. He told himself it was just the wind. When he reached the barn, his mother lay bundled in a worn blanket near the broken stall. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale. He knelt beside her, gently shaking her shoulder. "Ma, I got food," he whispered. "The Apache helped me. You're going to be all right now." Her eyes fluttered open just enough to see him. "Apache?" She breathed weakly. He nodded, tearing off a piece of the dried meat. "He wasn't mean, Ma. He helped me. Said I could work for more tomorrow." Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something, but she only coughed instead. He helped her take a small bite, then wrapped the rest back up carefully. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the barn walls. The boy pulled his coat tighter and settled beside her, trying to rest. But sleep wouldn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Apache's face, kind, yet unreadable. He wondered what the man thought of him, of his mother, the world beyond the hills where folks whispered that the Apaches didn't forgive easily. Somewhere in the darkness, a faint rustle made him sit up. He strained his ears. It wasn't the wind this time. The sound was heavier, deliberate. He stepped quietly toward the door, peering out into the shadows. His heart began to pound again. A figure stood near the tree line, barely visible in the moonlight. For a moment, the boy thought it was the Apache who'd helped him. But then, he noticed the shape too stocky, too tense. Whoever it was, they weren't from the camp. The figure moved closer, slow and careful. The boy's grip tightened on the axe handle. He thought of his mother lying helpless behind him and forced himself to stay quiet. The stranger stopped a few yards away. Then, in a low voice, came the words that froze him where he stood. "You shouldn't have gone to them, boy. They don't forget who took their land." The boy's throat went dry. He couldn't see the man's face clearly, but the tone carried something dark, something familiar. It was the sound of someone who had more anger than sense. He backed up slowly, ready to shut the door. "I don't want to trouble," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Too late for that," the man replied. "You brought it right to your doorstep." The boy's mind raced. Was this man from the valley? One of the settlers who hated the Apaches? Or was he something worse, a drifter who'd been watching the camp, waiting for a reason to strike? He stepped back, the axe trembling in his hand. The man outside shifted, his boots crunching softly in the frost. The silence between them stretched thin, heavy with the weight of what might happen next. The boy didn't move, barely breathing, torn between fear and the small spark of courage that had brought him there in the first place. The night pressed in around him, and for the first time he realized that asking for help might have awakened something dangerous. Something that wouldn't stop at the edge of the Apache camp or the broken barn where his mother lay. And as the figure outside took another step closer, the boy understood that this night was far from over. The boy's fingers gripped the axe, handle so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The cold air bit at his face. The sound of the stranger's boots crunching against the frozen ground made every muscle in his body tense. He couldn't see much beyond the dim light spilling from the cracks in the barn wall. But the man's shadow loomed larger with each slow step forward. Inside, his mother stirred weakly, her voice barely rising above a whisper as she called his name. He didn't answer. He didn't want her to know what was waiting outside. The stranger stopped a few feet away. The boy could hear the rustle of his coat and the sound of shallow breathing. "You think they're your friends now?" the man said, his tone low and hard. "You walk into Apache land and think they'll just give you food and let you go? They'll use you, boy. And when they're done, they'll come for the rest of us." The boy swallowed the lump in his throat. "They helped me." "They didn't have to. My mother's sick. That's how it starts," the man muttered. "You beg. They pity you. And before long, they think they own you. You don't know what they've done." "I don't care about what happened before," the boy said, his voice shaking. "All I know is they showed kindness when no one else would." The man gave a short, bitter laugh. "Kindness? You think that's what that is? You're young, boy. You don't understand what kind of people they are." Something in the man's voice made the boy's chest tighten. It wasn't just anger. It was fear, deep, old fear that came from years of stories and loss. The boy's father had once spoken of it too, back when he was alive, warning him to stay clear of Apache land. But his father had also taught him to see people for what they did, not what others said about them. The boy took a careful step back, still keeping the axe low. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said again. "You should go." The man's shadow shifted, and the boy thought he saw the glint of metal near his belt. Before he could react, distant sound broke through the tension, the sharp crack of a branch snapping underfoot, coming from deeper in the woods. The stranger turned his head quickly, eyes darting toward the sound. "Someone's following," he hissed. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then the man took a few steps back into the shadows and disappeared among the trees, leaving the boy staring into the dark. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint howl of a coyote across the river. He stayed still until the sound of footsteps faded completely, then slowly pushed the barn door shut and slid a broken board across it. When he turned, his mother was trying to sit up, her face pale and drawn. "Who was that?" she whispered. "I don't know," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Someone from the valley? Maybe. He didn't hurt me. He just said things." Her hand reached for his, trembling. "You shouldn't have gone to them." "It's not safe," he hesitated. "They saved us, Ma. If it wasn't for that Apache, we'd have nothing." Her eyes filled with worry. "They don't help for nothing, son. Folks, don't forget what happened out here." The boy didn't answer. He just sat there, listening to the wind rattle through the broken boards, thinking of the Apache man's calm eyes and the stranger's harsh voice. He didn't know who to believe. By morning, the frost had turned the grass white. His mother was sleeping fitfully, her breathing thin but steady. He ate the last bite of dried meat and tucked the cloth away carefully before stepping outside. The world was quiet, except for the river's murmur and the distant cry of a hawk. He made the walk back toward the Apache camp, his heart heavy with the weight of questions he didn't yet know how to ask. The sun climbed slowly, touching the mountain peaks with pale gold. When he reached the clearing, he saw the Apache man again, splitting logs near one of the fires. The boy waited until the man noticed him. "You came back," the Apache said, setting the axe down. "I said I would," the boy replied. "My mother's still sick, but she's resting. I can work more today." The Apache nodded approvingly. "Good. You keep your word. That means something." As they worked side by side, the boy found himself studying the man. His movements were strong and sure, each strike of the axe clean and practiced. There was no anger in the way he worked, only rhythm and purpose. After a while, the boy asked, "Why did you help me yesterday?" The Apache paused, resting his arm on the handle of the axe. "Because hunger does not care about where a man was born," he said simply. "A mother is a mother. A child is a child. It is not our way to let either starve." The boy thought about that quietly, unsure what to say. He'd never heard anyone from his side of the valley speak like that as the morning passed. A few others from the camp came to watch him work. Some smiled faintly. Others looked wary. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him but kept chopping. When he stopped to rest, an older woman approached and handed him a small bundle of herbs. "For your mother," she said in careful English. "Boil in water. It helps the chest." He thanked her, his throat tight with emotion. By midday, the Apache man, who the others called Lone Hawk, brought him a bowl of stew and motioned for him to sit by the fire. The smell made his stomach growl. As he ate, Lone Hawk sat across from him. "There are people who do not want peace," Lone Hawk said. "They see danger in what they do not understand. That man who came to you last night, he was not the first to wander close. Others watch from the valley. They think we still fight for land. They do not see that all we want is to live quietly." The boy looked up from his bowl. He said, "I brought trouble by coming here." Lone Hawk's eyes narrowed slightly. "Maybe you did, but not because of us." "What do you mean?" "There are men out there who want excuses," he said. "Excuses to take what is left. If they see one of their own with us, they will say we are plotting. They will bring soldiers again, and then no one wins." The boy felt a chill run through him. He hadn't thought that asking for food could cause anything more than a few angry words. Now he realized it might be bigger than that. That afternoon, he returned to the barn with the herbs and a few pieces of bread. His mother was awake, her eyes filled with questions the moment she saw him. "They gave me this for you," he said, showing her the bundle. "It's medicine," said to boil it in water. She hesitated but took it. "You shouldn't go back there again," she said quietly. "The men in town will talk. You know how they are." He knelt beside her. "What else can we do? They're the only ones who've helped." She didn't argue further, but the worry didn't leave her face. She stared toward the barn door, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. That night, as the wind howled across the plains, the boy couldn't shake the memory of the stranger's voice. He kept thinking about Lone Hawk's warning, about the men who might be watching. Sleep came in fits, filled with dreams of fire, hoofbeats, and voices shouting in the dark. When dawn broke again, smoke rose from somewhere far across the valley. At first, he thought it was from a farmer's field, but then he saw the black streak twisting upward, too dark, too thick to be from a hearth. His stomach knotted. He knew the direction. It was near the Apache camp. He ran before his mother could stop him, his breath clouding the morning air. The ground was frozen hard beneath his boots. As he reached the ridge overlooking the clearing, his chest tightened at the sight below. The camp that had been peaceful yesterday was in chaos. A few lodges were burning, and men on horseback were circling the edges. He froze, heart pounding, unsure whether to run forward or back. Then he saw Lone Hawk standing near the fire pit, shouting orders in his language, trying to drive the women and children toward the trees. The riders' faces were hard and determined, men from the valley, armed and angry. The boy's pulse roared in his ears. He recognized one of them, the stranger from the night before. For a long moment, he couldn't move. He felt caught between two worlds, both of which were breaking apart right before his eyes. Then, from across the clearing, Lone Hawk looked up and saw him. Their eyes met through the smoke. The Apache didn't speak, but his gaze carried a single message that the boy could read without words. "Run." The boy turned, but his feet wouldn't move. Every instinct told him to help, to do something. Yet he knew if he ran into that fire, he might never come out. Behind him, the crack of gunfire echoed through the hills. The horses screamed. Smoke curled higher, blotting out the pale morning sun. The boy dropped to his knees behind a boulder, covering his ears as the world around him shook. He wanted to shut it all out, the shouting, the smoke, the fear. But even as he trembled there, part of him knew this was only the beginning. The valley had been quiet for too long, and something old had woken again. Something that wouldn't rest until the truth came out about what really started the fire and who would pay for it. The smoke hung thick in the air, drifting through the pines like a gray ghost. From where the boy crouched behind the boulder, he could smell the fire, the sharp sting of burning hides, and the bitter scent of wood catching too fast. His hands shook against the frozen ground, dirt streaking his palms as he tried to steady himself. He could still hear shouting in the distance, men yelling orders and the thunder of horses tearing through the clearing. It didn't sound like a battle. It sounded like punishment. He peered over the rock just enough to see Lone Hawk running through the smoke, trying to pull two children away from a fallen lodge. The firelight caught the edges of his face, but even through the chaos, the man moved with purpose, his steps sure and fast. Nearby, one of the riders fired a shot into the air, shouting something about driving them off for good. The boy's heart sank. He knew those voices. They were men from the valley. Men who had always blamed the Apache for every missing animal, every broken fence, every wrong thing that happened when they needed someone to hate. He wanted to run to Lone Hawk, to shout that he hadn't meant for any of this to happen, but the sound of another gunshot made him duck down again. He pressed his back against the cold stone, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The fire crackled and roared behind him, and he realized that even if he wanted to help, there was nothing he could do. Then, through the noise, he heard something else, the clatter of hooves on the ridge above him. He turned and saw a small group of riders breaking off from the main group, heading in the direction of the river. His stomach turned cold. That was where his mother was. He ran. The ground tore at his boots as he sprinted down the slope, branches slapping against his face. He didn't look back. All he could think of was the barn, his mother lying weak and helpless inside. He crossed the river at the shallow bend, the icy water soaking his legs, and kept running until he saw the familiar outline of the old building. Smoke from the fires still drifted behind him. It's faint now, but steady. When he reached the barn, he found his mother sitting up, frightened by the noise of horses in the distance. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice thin. He dropped beside her, breathless. "Men from town. They went after the Apache. I think they're coming this way." Her face went pale. "No, they'll think you led them there." He froze. "What do you mean?" "They'll think you told the Apaches about the settlers." "I'll tell the settlers about them," she said quickly. "You went between both sides. They won't trust you now." He didn't want to believe her, but deep down, he knew she was right. Both sides had fear rooted too deep for a reason. He helped her stand, but she swayed, clutching her chest. "We have to go," he said. Now, before she could answer, a sound outside made him stop. Hooves, voices, they were already here. He helped her lie back down and grabbed the axe, though his hands were shaking so badly he could hardly keep his grip. Through a crack in the wall, he saw 3 riders dismounting. One of them was the stranger from before, the man with the hard eyes. He shouted something to the others, then kicked the barn door open with a heavy boot. The boy stepped forward, the axe raised, heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear. The man's gaze locked on him. "You again," he said coldly. "Didn't I warn you what would happen?" "You burned their homes," the boy said, his voice trembling. "They didn't do anything." "They were gathering," the man replied. "We saw it. They were getting ready for a raid. We just got to them first." "That's not true?" The man's eyes narrowed. "You've been out there, talking to them. What do you know?" "Enough to see you're wrong," the boy said. The man took a slow step forward, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "Careful, son. You're walking on dangerous ground. Folks in the valley don't take kindly to traitors." The word hit him like a slap. He wanted to shout that he wasn't anyone's enemy, that all he'd done was try to save his mother. But before he could speak, his mother's weak voice cut through the air. "Leave him alone. He's just a child." The man turned toward her. "Ma'am, you should have kept your boy close. He's mixed himself up in things bigger than he understands." He looked back at the boy. "If you know what's good for you, you'll stay away from those people. They'll bring nothing but blood to your doorstep." He motioned to the others and they turned to leave. But just before he stepped out, the man stopped and looked back. "If any of them come here," he said, "you'd best tell us. It might save your life." When they rode off, the boy sank to the ground, shaking. His mother reached for his hand. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "You know they will," he nodded, staring at the open doorway. He could still hear the faint echo of horses fading into the distance, and with it, a hollow fear that this wasn't over. That night, the sky turned an angry red over the horizon where the Apache camp had burned. The boy sat by the river, watching the reflection tremble in the water. His mind was full of questions. Had Lone Hawk escaped? Were the children safe? He wanted to go back. He didn't know if they'd trust him anymore, especially now that the settlers believed he'd betrayed them. As he sat there, he noticed movement across the water. A small figure emerged from the trees, then another. His heart leapt when he realized who it was. Lone Hawk, his face streaked with soot, carrying one of the children in his arms. Behind him, 2 women followed, limping but alive. The boy stood and ran to the riverbank. "Over here," he called. Lone Hawk looked up, relief flickering across his tired face. He crossed the shallow water, helping the women as they stumbled. When they reached the boy, they said nothing at first. Only the crackle of distant flames filled the silence. "They came without warning," Lone Hawk said finally. "We lost many. The rest scattered into the hills." The boy lowered his head. "I didn't tell them. I swear it," I know, Lone Hawk said softly. "But they will not believe that. And now, neither side will forget tonight." The boy's throat tightened. "You can stay here. No one will find you." Lone Hawk looked toward the barn in the distance. "They will come looking. They always do. He paused, then added, "But for now, we will rest." They helped the women inside, his mother watching in silent disbelief. When she saw Lone Hawk carrying the wounded child, her expression softened. She helped him lay the boy down near the fire. For a moment, the room was quiet, except for the faint breathing of the injured and the creak of old wood. Later, as the fire burned low, Lone Hawk spoke again. "You are brave," he said to the boy. "But bravery brings danger when the world is blind. You must choose where you stand, even when both sides are wrong." The boy didn't answer. He stared into the flames, his thoughts tangled between anger and guilt. Outside, the night wind carried the faint sound of voices, distant, scattered. He looked toward the valley and saw small lights moving across the hills. Lanterns. The riders were searching again. Lone Hawk noticed too. He stood slowly, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "They hunt what they fear," he said, "and fear is hungry tonight." The boy stepped closer to the door, his heart hammering. He could see the lights growing brighter, moving toward the river. He turned to Lone Hawk. "If they find you here, they'll kill you. They won't listen to me." "Then we must move," Lone Hawk said. He turned to the women. "Gather what you can." The boy's mother grabbed his hand. "You can't go with them," she said urgently. "They'll call you one of them." He looked at her, torn. "If I stay, they'll think I helped. Either way, they'll come for us." Her eyes filled with tears. But she said nothing more. The boy helped Lone Hawk lead the women out the back door into the darkness. The air was cold, and the moon cast long shadows through the trees. They moved quietly, every sound feeling too loud, as they reached the edge of the woods. Lone Hawk stopped and looked back at the barn, where a small flame still flickered in the window. "You will have to decide soon," he said to the boy. "The valley will not forgive easily, and the hills have long memories." The boy nodded. "I just want it to stop." Lone Hawk's voice was calm but heavy. "It will not stop until someone tells the truth. And the truth is a dangerous thing when men build their lives on lies." They disappeared into the forest shadows as the lanterns drew closer to the river, the riders' voices cutting through the night like the low growl of a storm. The boy looked back one last time, torn between two worlds that now felt equally lost to him. The smoke had faded, but its scent clung to everything in the air. His clothes, his thoughts. Somewhere behind him, a single gunshot echoed across the valley. The night seemed to hold its breath. The forest was quiet except for the whisper of wind moving through the pines. The boy could feel the cold pressing against his skin as he followed Lone Hawk and the others through the darkness. Every few steps, he glanced back, half expecting to see the glow of lanterns behind them. The night had grown thick with mist, and the sound of the river faded until all that remained was the faint crunch of their footsteps on frozen leaves. Lone Hawk led them deeper into the hills, moving fast but careful, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow. When they finally stopped, it was in a narrow clearing surrounded by tall rocks. A small fire flickered between them, the light dancing across their faces. The boy's mother sat near one of the women, coughing softly. Lone Hawk knelt beside her, offering a small pouch of herbs. "This will help," he said. "We must stay quiet now. The valley men are close." The boy looked toward the trees, feeling the pull of fear in his stomach. He couldn't stop thinking about the riders, the fire, and the anger in their voices. It didn't matter that Lone Hawk had saved him, or that the Apache had done nothing wrong. The men from the valley were convinced of their story and in their minds. That was all the truth they needed. As the hours passed, the mist grew heavier, curling around the trees like smoke. The boy sat near the fire, holding the axe across his knees. He tried to keep his eyes open, but exhaustion dragged at him. When he finally drifted into sleep, his dreams were filled with noise gunfire, shouting and his mother's voice calling his name. He woke with a start, the echo of the dream still in his ears. The fire had burned down to embers. Lone Hawk was already awake, crouched near the edge of the clearing, listening. His body was tense, still as stone. The boy followed his gaze and saw faint glimmers of light through the trees, lanterns moving slowly, searching. "They've crossed the river," Lone Hawk whispered. "We must move before the sun rises." The boy helped his mother stand, though she was weak and trembling. The others gathered their few things, and once again they moved through the forest, this time uphill toward the cliffs. The air grew colder with every step, and the path narrowed until they were walking single file. The boy's breath came in short bursts, the fear twisting tighter in his chest. He could hear voices behind them, now men shouting, dogs barking. The boy helped his mother stand, though she was weak and trembling. The others gathered their few things, and once again they moved through the forest, this time uphill toward the cliffs. The air grew colder with every step, and the path narrowed until they were walking single file. The boy's breath came in short bursts, the fear twisting tighter in his chest. He could hear voices behind them, now men shouting, dogs barking. At the top of the ridge, they stopped for a moment to catch their breath. From there, the boy could see the valley below, dark and silent, except for the faint orange glow of the burned Apache camp. Smoke still rose from the ruins, carried by the wind like a ghost that refused to leave. He thought of the children who hadn't made it out and felt a lump in his throat. Lone Hawk stood beside him, his face unreadable. "They will not stop," he said. "They think they bring justice, but they only bring more fire." "What will you do?" the boy asked. "Survive," Lone Hawk replied. "And remember," before the boy could speak, a sound broke through the stillness, a gunshot. Distant but close enough to make the birds startle from the trees. The boy flinched and turned toward the noise. "They found the trail," Lone Hawk said. "Go. Quickly." They ran along the ridge, the ground rough and uneven. His mother stumbled, and the boy caught her arm, urging her forward. The cold air burned his lungs, but he didn't stop. Behind them, voices grew louder, and flashes of light flickered between the trees. The riders were spreading out, closing in from different sides. Lone Hawk led them into a narrow gorge, half hidden by brush. The sound of rushing water filled the air, echoing off the rocks. "We cross here," he said. The water was shallow but fast, biting cold as they stepped in. The boy gritted his teeth, holding on to his mother as they pushed through. When they reached the other side, Lone Hawk motioned for them to climb the slope. They scrambled upward, slipping on the damp rocks. Then came another shot closer. This time, a bullet struck the dirt near the boy's foot. He froze, his heart pounding. Lone Hawk turned sharply, shouting something in his own tongue before firing an arrow back into the trees. The boy ducked low, pulling his mother behind a rock. The next few moments blurred into a rush of noise and motion men shouting. More gunfire, the crack of branches breaking. When the shooting stopped, the forest went eerily silent again. Lone Hawk crouched beside the boy, his breath visible in the cold air. "They will not stop hunting tonight," he said. "We must split. Some go north, some east. It will slow them." The boy shook his head. "No, we can't leave you." Lone Hawk placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have done enough. Protect your mother. That is your fight now." Before the boy could argue, another voice rang out in the distance, deep, commanding, and all too familiar. "Search every hill. They're close." It was the same man who had come to the barn. The boy felt a rush of anger and fear all at once. Lone Hawk looked toward the sound, his jaw tightening. "That man carries too much hate," he said quietly. "If he finds us, there will be no talking." They moved again, following a narrow trail along the ridge. The moon had sunk behind the clouds, leaving the forest dim and shadowed. The boy could barely see a few feet ahead, but Lone Hawk seemed to know every twist of the path. Finally, they reached a small cave hidden behind a curtain of rocks. "We'll rest here until dawn," Lone Hawk said. Inside, the air was cold and damp, but it offered shelter. The boy helped his mother lie down, wrapping her in a blanket. Lone Hawk stood near the entrance, watching the forest. His bow was ready, his posture calm but alert. The boy wanted to speak, but the words felt heavy. After a long silence, Lone Hawk said softly, "You remind me of my son." The boy looked up. "You have a son?" Hattie said, "He died when soldiers came through the valley years ago. They said it was to clear the land for farms. He was 12. The boy's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Lone Hawk nodded once. You are not like them. You have heart. But your people do not see hearts. They see enemies. The boy looked down at his hands. Maybe I can make them see. A faint smile crossed Lone Hawk's face. Maybe. But to do that, you must live first. Before dawn, the sound of horses came again, this time closer, echoing against the rocks. The boy felt his chest seize. Lone Hawk turned toward the cave entrance, his eyes narrowing. They've found us. He motioned for the boy and his mother to move deeper into the shadows. The boy could hear the men outside dismounting, their boots crunching against gravel. One voice shouted, "There's smoke nearby. Check the rocks." Lone Hawk whispered, "Stay quiet. No matter what happens." The boy clutched his mother's hand, trying to stay still. He could see faint outlines moving just beyond the entrance. Then, suddenly, a torch was thrown into the clearing outside, lighting up the stone walls. A voice called out, "We know you're in there. Come out, or we'll smoke you out like the rest." Lone Hawk stepped into the light, bow drawn. "You bring death to my people," he said loudly, his tone even, "but you will not take this one." The man's laugh echoed through the rocks. "You're a fool to think you can stop us alone." "I am never alone," Lone Hawk said. Before anyone could move, the first gunshot cracked through the cold air. The boy cried out, covering his ears as the cave filled with noise and dust. Lone Hawk returned fire, the sound of his arrows sharp and fast. The torches outside flared brighter, shadows jumping wildly across the stone. The boy crawled toward the back of the cave, dragging his mother with him. He could see flashes of light from the gunfire, hear the shouts and the echo of boots striking stone. Every sound seemed too close, too real. He wanted to run, but there was nowhere left to go then. Through the chaos, a single figure appeared at the entrance, the same man who had come to the barn, his face lit by the fire's glow. His revolver gleamed in his hand. "I warned you, boy," he said, voice cold. "Now look what you've done." The boy froze, heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Lone Hawk stood between them, his bow still drawn, though his arm trembled from exhaustion. The man raised his gun. "Step aside," he said. "This ends tonight." The air in the cave felt thick, charged with everything unsaid, the hate, the fear, the guilt that had brought them all here. The boy wanted to scream, to stop it somehow, but his voice wouldn't come. The torch outside flickered, casting a long shadow over the stone floor, and then the man's finger tightened on the trigger. The sound of the gunshot tore through the cave, echoing so loud that the boy thought his heart had stopped. For a moment no one moved. The smell of smoke and gunpowder filled the air. When the dust began to settle, he saw Lone Hawk standing still, bow lowered, eyes fixed on the man at the entrance. The man's hand was shaking, the revolver still raised, but his expression uncertain. The boy didn't understand what had happened until Lone Hawk took a slow step forward, calm and steady, even though a thin line of blood ran down his arm. "You have done enough harm," Lone Hawk said, his voice low but firm. "Leave this place. Take your hate with you." The man's jaw tightened. For a moment he looked like he might fire again, but something in Lone Hawk's eyes stopped him. Maybe it was the calm, or maybe the exhaustion that hung heavy between them. The boy could see it too, the realization that the fight wasn't about justice anymore. It was just fear and pride holding him there. Finally, the man lowered his gun, his breath unsteady. "You don't belong here," he muttered, stepping back. "This land belongs to all who live by it," Lone Hawk replied. "You only destroy what you do not understand." The man looked past him, his gaze landing on the boy and his mother. His face softened for the first time. The boy thought he saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. Without another word, the man turned and disappeared into the darkness, his footsteps fading down the slope until all that was left was the soft hum of the wind. Lone Hawk lowered his bow completely and leaned against the wall. The boy rushed to him, helping him sit down. His wound was shallow but bleeding. The boy tore a piece of his mother's shawl and tied it around his arm. Lone Hawk gave him a faint smile. "You did well," he said quietly. "You kept your heart strong." The boy nodded, but tears blurred his vision. I thought you were going to die. Not tonight, Lone Hawk said, his voice fading with exhaustion. There is still light waiting for you. Take your mother and go before the others return. They waited until the first sign of dawn touched the ridge outside. The forest was still, again, painted in pale gold. The boy and his mother helped Lone Hawk down the slope slowly, every step careful. When they reached the valley, the air smelled of frost and smoke. The ruins of the Apache camp were quiet now. The men who had caused so much destruction had already gone, leaving only ashes and silence. Lone Hawk stopped near a fallen tree and looked around. This was once a home, he said softly. We hunted here, laughed here. My people trusted the earth, and the earth took care of us. He turned to the boy. You must remember that, even when others forget. The boy nodded. I will. They built a small fire to keep warm. The boy watched the flames rise and fall, their glow soft against the morning light. For the first time in days, there was a strange calm around them. His mother leaned against a rock, her face pale but peaceful. Lone Hawk sat across from them, quiet and thoughtful. The boy could tell he was thinking about those who didn't make it, his family, his tribe, his son. The pain in his eyes said more than any words could. After a long silence, Lone Hawk spoke again. The valley will heal. It always does. But the men who came here, they will carry what they've done inside them. Hate leaves a mark, just like love does. The boy looked into the fire. Do you think they'll ever understand? Lone Hawk gave a small nod. Maybe one day. When they lose something they love, they'll see. Until then, you must live in a way that keeps the truth alive. The sun climbed higher, melting the last of the frost. Birds began to sing again, cautious but steady. It felt like the land was trying to breathe after holding its breath for too long. The boy helped his mother to her feet, and together they followed Lone Hawk down the narrow path toward the river. The sound of water rushing over stones filled the air, washing away the echoes of the past night. At the river's edge, Lone Hawk stopped. This is where we part, he said. My people who survived will go north. You must go back to your town. Tell them you saw nothing worth hating. The boy's throat tightened. Will I ever see you again? Lone Hawk looked out at the water. The wind carries voices even when people are gone. When you hear it in the trees, you'll know I am near. The boy wanted to say something more, but the words wouldn't come. He watched as Lone Hawk stepped into the river, the water glimmering around him. He crossed to the other side without looking back. The boy stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of the current. When they finally made their way home, the valley was quiet. The men had returned to their farms, pretending nothing had happened. The boy and his mother moved back into their small house by the fields. She spent her days tending to the garden, trying to forget the pain that still lingered in her heart. The boy helped her, but each night he would walk to the edge of the woods and look toward the hills. Somewhere beyond those trees, Lone Hawk was rebuilding what was lost. Seasons changed. The fields grew green again, and life returned to the valley. People stopped talking about the night of the fire. They didn't speak of the Apache or the things they had done in anger. But the boy never forgot. He kept the small bow Lone Hawk had given him, hanging it above the doorway as a reminder. Years later, when he grew older, he told his own children the story, not with bitterness, but with hope. He told them about the man who taught him that courage wasn't found in fighting, but in standing for what was right. He told them how hate blinded good people and how kindness could still rise from ashes. One summer evening, when the wind was gentle and the sky was painted gold, he walked down to the same river. The water moved quietly under the fading light. He could almost hear Lone Hawk's voice in the rustle of the reeds. The words came back to him, steady and clear. When you hear the wind, you'll know I am near. Smiled, closing his eyes for a moment. The valley was peaceful now. It had taken years, but the land had healed. Trees grew tall where the fire once burned, and the hills carried the songs of birds again. He felt proud, knowing that somewhere in that vast silence, the spirit of Lone Hawk still lived. That night, as he returned home, he paused by the doorway and looked at the bough hanging above it. His children were asleep, their faces soft in the lamplight. He whispered quietly, "You were right. The world does remember. It's a story of that winter, and the man from the hills became something sacred in his heart. A quiet truth carried through generations. It reminded him that peace wasn't something people were given. It was something they had to build, piece by piece, even in the shadow of pain. As he sat by the window watching the stars, he felt the wind rise again, soft and familiar. It moved through the fields and into the trees, carrying with it a sense of calm that words could never fully hold. Somewhere beyond that horizon, he believed Lone Hawk was smiling too, and in that simple thought, everything found its place. The boy who once ran in fear had grown into a man who understood that even in the darkest hours, there was always something worth saving. Love, memory, and truth, they were stronger than hate. They were what made the world whole again. The valley slept under the gentle breath of night, carrying the quiet promise that the land would always heal, and that every story, no matter how heavy, could find its peace in time.